Today, we have more news. A judge ruling that Donald Trump's admittedly sweeping pardons for January 6 convicts will not cover an individual who allegedly plotted to murder the FBI agents who were investigating him. That individual narrowing of basically how far the pardons might go.
Señores, ¿se imaginan que un presidente pueda despedir a quien quiera, cuando quiera y sin que nadie pueda detenerlo? Un líder que pueda controlar el poder judicial, eliminar a sus críticos y reescribir las reglas del juego a su antojo. No se trata de una teoría conspirativa. Es algo que Donald Trump ha intentado hacer y que en este momento está siendo frenado por los tribunales. Sean bienvenidos políticamente en desacuerdo. Hoy veremos cómo es que Donald Trump sigue obsesionado con acaparar más poder, pero se ve debilitado en cuanto un juez dictamina que él no puede despedir a diestras y siniestras. Así que los invito a que se queden hasta el final de este video porque también estaremos viendo otras noticias muy interesantes. Veremos cómo el evento de Trump del día de ayer se ha visto detenido abruptamente luego de un momento muy humillante. Ok amigos, para poder entender el contexto de la primera noticia, quiero que veamos este pequeño fragmento donde se muestra una de las decisiones más polémicas de Trump en este momento y de cómo pues un juez le ha puesto un pequeño pare. Veamos este clip.
Tonight we began our newscast with ways that Donald Trump is clearly losing measurably with reactions in the markets and out in the country in a lot of these districts. That's partly because of how people think, feel, and are reacting to the results. Then there's the way that Donald Trump is losing in how to govern because he's exceeded his authority. And that story primarily takes place in the courts. Today, we have more news. A judge ruling that Donald Trump's admittedly sweeping pardons for January 6 convicts will not cover an individual who allegedly plotted to murder the FBI agents who were investigating him. That individual narrowing of basically how far the pardons might go comes as Trump's other orders are facing a range of challenges. We have this legal report card. This is just 2 weeks running. The X's show the areas that things are being paused or outright losing, and there's a heck of a lot more of them than orders going forward. You could also see that resistance that I'm talking about represented in Washington. There was a kind of emotional scene outside a key labor office where the individual who had been attempted to be fired by Trump returned to work because she went from a you're fired apprentice style to you're actually rehired based on the ruling by a judge.
This case was not about me, it was about the agency and the people who work for the agency and who are so dedicated to our mission.
This goes to bedrock principles of the United States government. On the one hand, the president has very broad authority and picks all of his or her own top people, like cabinet members and aides. On the other hand, there's a large federal bureaucracy. The president of the United States does not get to hire and fire every individual soldier. And no one thinks that would be a good idea, by the way. So the question in this case was actually kind of narrow. Was this the part of the government where the president gets his pick, like the cabinet, or was it something else? And the judge said it wasn't even close, that what Trump wanted were king-like powers to extend beyond those sections of the government I mentioned, ruling, quote, an American president is not a king. Trump is also making wholesale changes inside the Justice Department. There's an order that basically bans the federal government from hiring, working with law firms that represented individuals that he views as foes.
I just saw you sign executive orders for law firms. One of the law firms was Perkins Coie, yeah, that was the law firm that had the Steele dossier.
Yeah, they had the Steele dossier, they had a lot of other things, and we have a lot of law firms that we're going to be going after.
Some of those lawyers are hiring their own lawyers to try to challenge and fight what they view as obvious retribution. Donald Trump's answer in that interview also didn't exactly say, oh, we have other good faith reasons, this is about competence or performance. He just referred to that so-called dossier and the idea that any of these firms ever did something he didn't like. And just to remind you, unlike every other president in history, Trump is demanding a kind of absolute loyalty for contractors, for agencies that we've just never seen. I think that it's fair to say that the individual membership of the National Labor Relations Board is not the top tip of the spear issue right now. Interestingly, even the official kind of acknowledged that. But it, according to the judge in this case and the loss dealt to Donald Trump, it means something more. Can you edify us on that?
Yeah, this actually is quite an important development here. This is about a member of an independent commission that is supposed to be nonpartisan in function, one that was created by Congress. So there are all sorts of other issues, as you've noted, regarding cabinet appointees, maybe lower level, but there's controlling law on this specific issue that goes back to 1935, Supreme Court decision that prevents a president from just ignoring restrictions on removal that are provided in a statute for a commission like this. Now, as the judge in this case noted, that makes this an easy case for her. It'll probably make it an easy case for the D.C. Circuit if it gets up there. The question will be whether the Supreme Court affirms that old decision or tries to overturn it, and there are some indications that they may be willing to erode that. But for now, this is an important victory for Ms. Wilcox and for folks who want to see sort of the ordinary rules of the road still apply here.
Yeah, and a lot of this has come down to power. Many presidents, to be clear, have preferred readings of the law that expanded rather than limited their power. And some deliberately tested it. I mean, you read about Harry Truman trying to seize private business in law school because the question was, well, even in war, even for what was at the time seen as a good priority, what are the limits on those powers? And so here, Trump, unlike those presidents, doesn't even seem, and tell me your analysis, but from what I'm seeing, doesn't seem to care, doesn't seem to need it to be a big or important issue, doesn't care sometimes if past rulings, precedents, and laws already drew the line. He's availed of good counsel. Anyone who's not afraid to speak to him can say, well, just so you know, we can do this. But just so you know, this case was decided recently the other way. And so I wonder what you observe in that, that I'm not here telling viewers this is the worst ever thing that's never happened before. Other presidents have done things like this. But I can tell them that we have never seen it so wanton and so broad in its sort of power-hungry agenda.
Yeah, no, that's the thing that I like to focus people's attention on, because you're right. There are always efforts by a president in power to sort of push the boundaries a little bit and expand their power a little bit. What distinguishes what Trump is doing here from those prior situations is not only does Trump not care about these prior rulings, he has people on his staff who affirmatively want to overturn many of those rulings. And the second distinction, which is really important, is this isn't just a one-off. The volume and intensity of the things that Trump has been attempting to do here on so many different executive branch fronts, not just the firings, not just the purges of the civil service, but you also have the freezes on aid, the supposed, the impoundment of funds, and all sorts of other activities that are designed to dramatically expand the power of the executive branch and to dramatically limit the power of Congress. And that's a real sea change in our democracy if that sort of succeeds at the end of the day. And I think it's important for people to focus on that, because the daily in and out, it can be hard to follow. But this is part of a much larger effort.
Yeah, the other big news item, and we showed Trump speaking about it in that interview, was the crackdown on independent law firms, which tend to have membership of both parties, if you're counting. A lot of top Washington law firms have folks who've served in government under both parties' administrations. But he wants to crack down on those that he thinks have represented people he doesn't like, whether it's tied to Hillary Clinton or Jack Smith or what have you. For someone listening who says, all right, so what? What's your answer to that when we think about the tradition of independent legal advocacy in this country?
Yeah, and it is tempting for people to say, so what, because these seem like elite lawyers, fancy lawyers. But look, it is really dangerous for the government and the president himself to punish people simply because they happen to represent a viewpoint or have a client who represents a viewpoint that they do not like as a political matter. That is very, very dangerous. And this could be, something that if people just let it stand, you could easily see it encroaching even further into other spheres, into other industries as well. And by the way, Trump, I think Trump and his staff have indicated that, this might be about national security, or I think even someone mentioned DEI today. That is a farce and a pretext. I mean, I think everybody knows what's going on here, and he admitted it in the interview that you played. This is really about Perkins Coie representing the Democratic Party. Exactly. And that is not something that we should tolerate in this country.
Perfecto. Lo que acabamos de ver, amigos, es este ejemplo clarísimo de cómo Donald Trump no acepta límites a su autoridad. En este caso, pues él intentó despedir a una funcionaria de un organismo que es independiente, simplemente porque no le gustaba su postura. Pero este juez dictaminó que su despido era ilegal. Es decir, intentó hacer lo que hace en el aprendiz, despedir a quien le da la gana, pero en la vida real no funciona así. Amigos, el problema aquí es mucho más profundo de lo que parece. Donald Trump no solo ha intentado despedir a empleados públicos arbitrariamente, sino que ha intentado cambiar las reglas del juego para que su autoridad no tenga frenos. Esto no es una cuestión de quién se queda o se va de un cargo, es equilibrio de poderes, el respeto a las instituciones. Para esto hay dos puntos claves que tienen que entender. Donald Trump quiere poder absoluto sobre el gobierno. Al intentar despedir a funcionarios que no están bajo su control directo, ya nos demuestra que no le importa el funcionamiento de las agencias independientes. Estas agencias existen precisamente para poder evitar abusos de poder. Y si un presidente puede manipularlas, básicamente puede moldear al gobierno a su antojo. Y luego, las cortes están frenando sus intentos de abuso de poder. El simple hecho de que un juez haya intervenido para detenerlo ya nos demuestra que aún existe una pizca de funcionamiento en el sistema. Pero ustedes deberían de preguntarse qué pasaría si no tuviéramos ese freno judicial. Donald Trump ya ha insinuado que quiere cambiar la estructura del gobierno para que, como presidente, tenga más control y tenga menos restricciones. No solamente es eso, porque él también está atacando a abogados y bufetes que representaron a personas que lo investigaron o enfrentaron legalmente. ¿Se imaginan a un presidente que decide qué abogados pueden trabajar y cuáles no, dependiendo solo si le caen bien o no? Amigos, eso ya es un atentado directo en contra de la independencia judicial, del derecho de defensa. Ahora bien, yo sé que algunos dirían, pero todos los presidentes han intentado tener más poder. Y sí, es cierto que muchos líderes han tratado de expandir su autoridad. Pero aquí, amigos, hay una diferencia fundamental. Donald Trump no solo quiere más poder. Lo que él quiere es no tener ningún tipo de contrapeso. La historia ya nos ha demostrado que cuando un líder intenta debilitar las instituciones que pueden detenerlo, el resultado suele ser desastroso para la economía. En resumen, Donald Trump sigue demostrando, que su visión de la presidencia es ser un líder todopoderoso, sin límites ni controles. La pregunta es, ¿realmente queremos que una persona tenga tanto poder sin que nadie pueda detenerlo? Los invito a que me dejen sus opiniones en los comentarios, mientras pasamos a la siguiente noticia. Y es que, amigos, el día de ayer el evento de Trump se ha visto detenido abruptamente. Pues yo diría que Trump ha tocado a fondo una vez más. Yo sé que puede sonar un poco exagerado, ¿no? Pero es la realidad. Es tan mala su situación en este momento que incluso sus aliados en los medios le están dando la espalda. Como respuesta, él está tomando medidas extremas. Está prohibiendo y está expulsando a periodistas de sus eventos. No quiere que se hable de la crisis económica que él mismo está provocando en el país. En una reunión con directores ejecutivos y empresarios en Washington, hemos visto cómo la transmisión tuvo que ser cortada abruptamente y vimos cómo los camarógrafos eran sacados del lugar. Todo esto porque Trump está en una situación desesperada. Esto, amigos, quiero que lo vean.
And be just the opposite. That's happened before. There's people that they tend to go after one group or another, but basically it's the other. They go after conservatives, and when somebody stands up and fights, their business ends up doubling. You can see that. Just a little example. Goya Foods, he was just a wonderful man, the owner and family, and largely Hispanic foods. And they went after him because he supported me. And this was the end of the first term. And he fought back, and it ended up that he ended up tripling his business. And it's today a much bigger business than it was before. And there are many examples of that. And maybe it's going to be that way with Elon. When I saw what was happening with this, the concerted effort by Page, I think they're paid agitators. And when I saw what was happening, I said, I want to buy a Tesla.
Así fue como comenzó la reunión, amigos. Así es como arrancó este evento de Trump, afirmando que los precios de Tesla se duplicaron y se duplicarían gracias a él. Pero lo más impactante fue la corrupción descarada que presenciamos en la Casa Blanca hoy. Quiero que lo analicemos en detalles, pero hay algo que quedó clarísimo. Mientras el país enfrenta una recesión, Donald Trump solo está preocupado por favorecer a Elon Musk. Los precios están subiendo, el mercado se está desplomando, la gente está en pánico y Donald Trump sigue obsesionado con su copresidente. Y esto quedó en evidencia cuando le hicieron esta pregunta. Veamos este clip.
No, that's beautiful. Yeah. Mr. President talks about some of the violence that's been going on around the country at dealerships. Some say they should be labeled domestic terrorists.
I will do that. I'll do it. I'm going to stop them.
Ya hemos hablado de esto en un video anterior, pero ahora Trump está yendo aún más lejos. Está amenazando e intimidando a quienes se atreven a protestar contra Elon Musk. O sea, si te paras fuera de una tienda de Tesla y protestas pacíficamente, si criticas a Elon Musk en redes sociales, es posible que termines en la mira. ¿No sería descabellado pensar que hasta el FBI, dirigido por personas leales a Trump, intervengan de alguna manera? Amigos, no es una teoría descabellada, viendo el tipo de gente que él ha puesto en el poder. Esto también se relaciona con el tema de los aranceles. Fue un comentario de Jessica Tarlov, lo que en mi opinión terminó desencadenando todo el desastre que llevó a la expulsión de los periodistas en el evento de Trump. Veamos este clip.
An ethics violation. Even the strongest allies of the president don't like these tariffs. They might think it's possible to use them at smaller levels, 5%, 10%, but the tariff whiplash is destroying us. You look at the market tanking, and I thought Peter Doocy had a great point earlier on today, our very own Peter Doocy, where he said they want federal workers to take the buyout. They want them to retire, but they're sinking their retirement accounts. And Caroline Levitt is standing up there at the podium, and she's just either she doesn't know how a tariff works or she's lying to the people. She said tariffs are a tax hike on foreign countries and a tax cut for the American people. And then a reporter, I think from the AP, so they got back in the room, said, have you ever paid a tariff? I have. They don't get charged on foreign countries. And then she went Trumpian. She goes, I think it's insulting that you're trying to test my knowledge on economics. I'll test your knowledge on economics, Jesse.
Go.
Are tariffs a tax on the American consumer?
If you have a tariff on a product, Jessica,
Yeah,
what
you
that
yes
does
no
is it makes
Why?
American workers rich.
Las mentiras finalmente lo están alcanzando, incluso dentro del mundo MAGA, especialmente entre los empresarios que ayudaron a Trump a llegar al poder. Hay una gran indignación con sus políticas de aranceles, y esa es la razón por la que su evento se detuvo abruptamente y los medios fueron sacados. Veamos lo que ocurrió.
They weren't.
Thank you, Mr. President. You've also mentioned rebuilding the American top priority. And I guess, what's your strategy to lower the overall cost of living, make everyday expenses more?
Podemos ver claramente a un camarógrafo desmontando su cámara, saliendo del lugar, además de otros periodistas abandonando la sala. No fue solo una persona cansada de escuchar a Trump, aunque, sería totalmente comprensible. No, esto fue una retirada masiva de la prensa. No querían cubrir lo que estaba por suceder. Donald Trump enfrentando el descontento de los empresarios. Un desastre en toda regla. Mientras tanto, el país está en crisis. La economía se está hundiendo y la Cámara de Representantes se prepara para despojar a la gente de su Medicaid. No hay forma de que Trump le esté yendo peor en este momento. Y exactamente es lo que Hakeem Jeffries destacó en esta intervención. Veamos este clip.
I don't really understand the fatal attraction reference because if anyone is dealing with fatal attraction, it's between President Trump and House Republicans. As soon as he says jump, your only answer is how high. It doesn't matter whether you are hurting the American people. That's why House Republicans are marching the country on a track toward the largest Medicaid cut in American history. You hurt children, hurt families, hurt Americans with disabilities, hurt seniors, close nursing homes and close hospitals. When Donald Trump says jump, extreme MAGA Republicans say how high. That's the fatal attraction. That's hurting the people of the United States of America. And by the way, the core promise that you made last year was about lowering costs. All you talked about was how you were going to lower the high cost of living. Democrats believe that America is too expensive. Housing costs are too high. Grocery costs are too high. Child care costs are too high. Utility costs are too high. And insurance costs are too high. America is too expensive. And insurance costs are too high. America is too expensive. We believe that that, in fact, is the case. But Republicans have done nothing to lower the high cost of living. No bill, no executive order, no administrative action. That's the broken promise. We were told by President Trump that costs were going to go down on day one. Grocery prices haven't gone down, they've gone up. Inflation is up. You know what's going down? The stock market. Because President Trump and House Republicans are crashing the economy in real time and marching us to a possible Republican recession. That's what's confronting the American people. And so now we have this partisan, reckless spending bill that we're being asked to consider on the floor today. Bipartisan negotiations were underway. Rosa DeLauro was at the table, working to reach an agreement consistent with the Fiscal Responsibility Act that was passed by Republicans and Democrats and then signed into law in 2023. But when Donald Trump says jump, extreme MAGA Republicans say how high. And he ordered the Republicans to leave the negotiating table to try to jam this far-right extremist bill down the throats of the American people. There are so many challenges with this bill, too many to detail. But let me just articulate a few. The House Republican, highly partisan, shutdown threatening bill is an attack on veterans, it's an attack on families, it's an attack on seniors. It cuts funding for veterans, including billions of dollars in funds that will be cut from veterans in desperate need of health care for people who serve this country, who are suffering from painful exposure to toxic substances, Agent Orange, and burn pits. And this bill, before this House, cuts billions of dollars in that health care that is desperately needed. That's an attack on veterans. It's an attack on children and families in America because this bill cuts funding for nutritional assistance that would otherwise be available for everyday Americans to put food on the table. When people are already struggling because grocery prices aren't going down, they're going up under this administration. And yet, this Republican bill will cut funding for nutritional assistance. That's an attack on children and families here in America. It's an attack on seniors, an attack on everyday Americans, an attack on housing, an attack on health care, which cuts funds from things like Alzheimer's research to help older Americans battle these challenges That's what this extreme Republican bill is all about. It will hurt families, hurt seniors, and hurt veterans. The second problem, equally troublesome, is that this bill does nothing to protect Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid. We've been very clear. As Democrats, we look forward in this Congress to protecting these vitally important priorities for the American people. Why is the bill silent on these priorities? Because you are trying to set in motion a chainsaw to Social Security, a chainsaw to Medicare, and a chainsaw to Medicaid. Your other boss yesterday confirmed that when he said that these entitlement programs, as he called them, they're not entitlement programs, they are earned benefits.
Amigos, como siempre, este es el momento de señalarlo, de denunciarlo sin descanso. Y eso es lo que vamos a seguir haciendo en este canal todos los días. Muchísimas gracias por acompañarme hasta el final de este video. Como siempre, si me quieres apoyar, regálame un like, comparte el video con tus amigos y suscríbete a nuestro canal, Políticamente en Desacuerdo. Nos vemos en el próximo video. Hasta luego.